Your grass is 1 inch over the limit, Renee. That's a $200 fine, and if you can't pay it, that's not my problem. That's a lien on your house. Marcus said it standing on her porch, sunglasses pushed up on his head, clipboard tucked under one arm like a weapon he was proud of. Renee stood in her doorway holding a glass of lemonade she'd made for her kids, and she felt her hand tighten around it until her knuckles hurt. "You measured my lawn?" she said. "With what? A ruler?" "With the community standards everyone agreed to when they bought here," he said. "I don't make the rules. I just enforce them." She would find out months later exactly how much of a lie that was, that he'd been writing the rules to fit his own pockets the whole time, and that the $200 fine on her lawn was smaller than the amount he was quietly siphoning out of the community's landscaping budget every single month. But that morning, standing on her porch with her lemonade sweating in her hand, all Renee knew was that this man had fined her 4 times in the last year, and every time it felt personal. Renee had moved into Brookhaven Estates 6 years earlier with her husband Tom and their 2 kids, drawn in by the tidy sidewalks, the community pool, the little clubhouse with string lights that made the whole neighborhood look like a postcard. Marcus had been HOA president for 4 of those 6 years, re-elected every time because nobody else wanted the job. And because, as she'd later learn, he made sure nobody else got the chance to run against him. He was the kind of man who wore a windbreaker even in July, who drove a golf cart around the neighborhood on weekend mornings measuring grass height and checking mailbox paint colors against an approved swatch card. Homeowners joked about him behind his back. Nobody joked about him to his face because everybody had, at some point, gotten a letter with his signature on it. Renee got more letters than most. It started small. A trash can left out 4 hours past pickup, $50. A basketball hoop in the driveway, $75. A wreath on her door in October that Marcus decided was seasonal decor outside approved dates, another $50. She paid them because that's what you did, because fighting an HOA felt like fighting a wall of paperwork nobody had time for. But then the fines started climbing, and they started arriving suspiciously close together, and they started feeling less like enforcement and more like a pattern aimed directly at her. It was Tom who noticed it first, spreading the letters across their kitchen table one night like a losing hand of cards. 4 fines in 5 months, he said. Nobody else on this street has gotten more than 1. Maybe we're just messy, Renee said, only half joking. Our lawn looks better than the neighbors, and they haven't gotten a single letter in 2 years. She didn't think much of it. Not yet. Not until the night she stood up at the quarterly HOA meeting, folder in hand, and asked a question that would change everything. The meeting was in the clubhouse, folding chairs arranged in crooked rows, a pitcher of stale coffee sweating on a card table. Marcus stood at the podium in his windbreaker, running through the agenda the way he always did, fast, monotone, daring anyone to interrupt. Landscaping expenditures for the quarter, he said, flipping a page, came in at $18,400, consistent with prior quarters. Renee raised her hand. Can I ask what that $18,000 covers specifically? Marcus barely looked up. General landscaping maintenance. Right, but mowing the common areas doesn't usually cost that much. I looked into it. Neighboring HOAs our size are paying 1/3 of that. I'd just like to see an itemized breakdown. A ripple went through the room, not loud, just a shift in posture, a few heads turning toward her, a few toward Marcus. The board reviews all expenditures, he said, voice flat and final. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing. I have submitted them in writing, Renee said. Twice. I haven't gotten a response. Then I'll look into it, he said, already moving to the next item, and something in the way he said it, smooth, dismissive, done, told her she wasn't going to get an answer, not without pushing harder than a raised hand in a folding chair. She didn't know yet that Marcus had spent that entire meeting doing the math on how fast he could bury her. 3 days later, a new letter arrived, then another, then a third the following week. A fence stain that was allegedly the wrong shade, a garden hose left visible from the street, a structural violation on a shed that had been standing unremarked upon for 4 years. Each fine was bigger than the last. Within a month, Renee owed Brookhaven Estates over $2,000 in violations that had never existed before. She asked one question at a meeting. She went to the HOA office, a converted room off the clubhouse, and found Marcus's assistant, a tight-lipped woman named Sharon, filing paperwork behind a desk covered in violation forms. "These fines started right after I asked about the budget," Renee said, sliding the letters across the desk. "That's not a coincidence." Sharon didn't even look up fully. "Mr. Pemberton follows the covenants strictly. If your property is in violation, it's in violation. My shed has been there for 4 years? Then it's been in violation for 4 years, Sharon said, and something about the rehearsed calm of it made Renee's stomach turn. She started keeping a folder. Every letter, every date, every amount cross-referenced against her neighbor's properties, because if this was retaliation, she wanted proof, not just a feeling. That's when she started actually talking to her neighbors instead of just nodding at them across driveways. Lewis lived 2 houses down, a retired contractor who mowed his lawn with the precision of a man defusing a bomb, and who had notably never gotten a single fine in 9 years of living in Brookhaven. "You really think he's targeting you?" Lewis asked, leaning on his mailbox while Renee laid out the timeline for him. "I think it's strange that I ask one question about the budget and suddenly I owe $2,000, she said. "That's not a theory, that's a calendar." Luis was quiet for a second, scratching at his jaw. "You know Ginny got hit with a lien last year, never told anybody why." "A lien? For what?" She wouldn't say, just paid it and went quiet. Renee found Ginny 2 streets over, a widow in her 60s who tended a garden so meticulous it looked professionally landscaped, and who visibly flinched when Renee brought up the HOA. "I don't want trouble," Ginny said at first, arms crossed over a cardigan despite the heat. "I paid what I owed." "I'm not trying to start trouble," Renee said gently. "I just want to understand why. My fines started right after I questioned the budget at a meeting. Did yours?" Ginny was quiet for a long moment, looking back toward her house like Marcus might be standing in the window somewhere behind her. "I asked why the pool resurfacing cost $30,000 when my nephew does that work and quoted me $8,000, Ginny said finally, voice low. 2 weeks later, I had a lien for unauthorized fence modifications on a fence I put up 9 years ago with board approval. I fought it. I lost. It cost me $4,000 I didn't have." Renee felt something settle into place, cold and certain. This wasn't sloppy management. This was a pattern, deliberate and repeated, aimed at anyone who asked the wrong question. "There's got to be others," Renee said. There were. Once she started asking directly instead of hinting, she found 3 more households with the same story. A question asked at a meeting, a suspicious fine within weeks, a lien if they pushed back hard enough. All of it buried under invoices marked landscaping, common area maintenance, capital improvements. Vague enough that nobody without a reason to dig had ever dug. Renee had a reason now. She called a meeting of her own. Not official, just her kitchen table. 6 chairs pulled in tight, Louie and Ginny and 3 others crowded around with coffee going cold in front of them. "We can't outfine him," Renee said. "We can't outvote him because half the neighborhood doesn't show up to meetings and the ones who do are scared of him, but we can get someone to look at the books who isn't scared of anybody." "A forensic accountant costs money," Louie said. "So we pool it," Renee said. "Everyone who's gotten hit unfairly puts in what they can. If I'm wrong, we've spent some money proving I'm wrong. If I'm right, if you're right, he's been stealing from every single one of us for years," Ginny said quietly, and nobody argued with that. They pooled $4,000 between 6 households, some of it money they genuinely couldn't spare, which told Renee everything about how much this mattered to them. And Louie found the accountant through an old contractor buddy. A sharp, unbothered man named Ezra Kwan, who specialized in exactly this kind of thing, small community associations with big blind spots. HOAs are some of the easiest places in the world to hide money, Ezra told them the first time they met, spreading 3 years of financial statements across Renee's dining table. Nobody audits them like a business, and residents almost never ask for anything more detailed than a total. "Give me your board minutes, your bank statements if you can get them, and every invoice you've got. I'll tell you what I find." "What if he refuses to hand anything over?" Renee asked. Then that tells you something too, Ezra said, and he wasn't wrong. Marcus refused. Loudly. When Renee formally requested through the proper channel, in writing, exactly the way Sharon always told her to, a full financial disclosure for the audit, Marcus stood up at the next board meeting and called it to her face a personal vendetta dressed up as due diligence. I'm asking for transparency, Renee said. That's not a vendetta. That's a right every homeowner here has. You're asking for a witch hunt because you don't like paying your fines, he said, and a few people actually laughed. A nervous, uncomfortable laugh, the kind that comes from not knowing who's more dangerous to disagree with. But the request had been filed correctly, on record, and under the association's own bylaws, he had 30 days to respond, or the state's HOA Oversight Board could compel disclosure. He knew it. Renee watched him do the math behind his eyes and decide, apparently, that 30 days of stalling was better than compliance. While they waited, the retaliation got worse. A lien notice arrived at Renee's house, $6,000 in cumulative violations, a number that made Tom go pale reading it at the kitchen table. They're accelerating, he said. This isn't fines anymore. This is trying to take the house. I know, Renee said, and for the first time since this started, her voice shook. That's exactly what it is. She called Ezra that night, later than she probably should have. He's trying to bury me before the audit finishes, she said. Then we finish faster, Ezra said. Get me everything you have tonight. I'll pull bank records through the state disclosure request in the morning. If he's hiding something, 30 days is usually enough time for a man like this to get sloppy trying to cover it. Not enough time to actually cover it. He was right. It took Ezra 11 days to find the first real thread. A landscaping company called Green Ridge Grounds that had been invoicing Brookhaven Estates for $11,000 a month, every month for the past 3 years, for services that, according to 4 separate homeowners who'd watched the actual crew work, never involved more than 2 guys and a truck showing up every other week to mow common areas that should have cost a fraction of that. Green Ridge Grounds, Ezra said, sliding a printout across Renee's table, is registered to an address in the next county. Guess who owns the property at that address? Renee looked at the name and felt her stomach drop. Sharon, she said. His assistant. Her maiden name, technically, but yes, same woman. The company's bank account routes payments to a second account co-owned by Marcus. He's not skimming a little off invoices, Renee. He built himself a private company, made it the HOA's landscaping vendor, and has been paying himself $11,000 a month for 3 years through it. That's, Renee did the math out loud, slow, like saying it faster would make it less real. That's almost $400,000. $396,000 to be exact, once you factor in the smaller kickbacks buried in capital improvement line items, Ezra said. Pool resurfacing that cost $8,000, invoiced at $30,000. Clubhouse repairs that cost $6,000, invoiced at $22,000. It's not one big theft. It's 100 small ones dressed up as maintenance, going back at least 3 years, maybe longer if I get access to older records. Renee sat back in her chair, and for a second the anger she'd been carrying for months went quiet, replaced by something colder and steadier. He fined me $200 for grass height, she said, while stealing $400,000 from the same people he was fining. People like him always punish small things loudly, Ezra said, so nobody looks at the big thing happening quietly. The annual HOA meeting was 6 weeks out, the one meeting every year that actually drew a crowd, because it was where the budget got approved and the board got reelected. Renee had planned at first to bring her findings to the regular quarterly meeting the moment they were ready. Ezra talked her out of it. You want him in a room he can't control, Ezra said. Quarterly meetings? 20 people show up and he steamrolls them. Annual meeting? The whole neighborhood's there, because that's when the budget gets voted on. Bigger room, bigger witnesses, bigger fall. So she waited, and while she waited, Marcus kept swinging. He escalated the lien to $8,000, cited a new violation. An unapproved paint color he claimed her house had had for 2 years, conveniently never mentioned until now, and sent a certified letter warning of foreclosure proceedings if the balance wasn't settled within 60 days. It was timed, Renee was certain, to land right before the annual meeting, meant to either scare her into silence or bury her under legal panic before she could stand up in front of anyone. It didn't work. If anything, it sharpened her. "He thinks I'll fold," she told Tom the night the foreclosure letter arrived, spreading it flat on the table next to Ezra's findings like two halves of the same ugly picture. "He doesn't know I've got 396,000 reasons to stay standing." Word had gotten around the neighborhood by then, quietly, the way real information moves faster than official information ever does. Louis had talked to Ginny. Ginny had talked to 2 more families, and by the time the annual meeting rolled around, Renee wasn't walking into that clubhouse with 6 allies. She was walking in with close to 40 homeowners who'd heard enough rumors to want answers, and a stack of documents that could finally give them some. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed tighter than Renee had ever seen it. Folding chairs dragged in from a storage closet, people standing along the back while the coffee pot working overtime. Marcus stood at the podium in his windbreaker, unaware, running through the agenda in his usual flat monotone, completely confident that this year would go exactly like every other year. "Landscaping expenditures for the fiscal year," he said, flipping a page, "came in at $132,000, consistent with prior years, allocated across." "Actually," Renee said, standing up, folder in hand, "I'd like to present something to the board and the community, if that's all right." Marcus's jaw tightened, just slightly, the first crack in 4 years of practiced calm. "This isn't on the agenda." "It's an open forum item," Renee said, "which according to your own bylaws any homeowner can request with 48 hours notice. I submitted mine 6 days ago. Sharon has the email." Somewhere near the front, Sharon's face went the color of old paper. Renee didn't wait for permission. She walked to the front of the room, set her folder on the podium next to Marcus, close enough that he had to step half a foot back, and turned to face the crowd. "6 months ago, I asked this board a simple question," she said. "Where does our landscaping money go?" I got fined for asking. So did at least 5 other households in this room, right after they asked similar questions. "I want to show you what an independent forensic audit found when it finally got to look at 3 years of our financial records." She nodded to the back of the room, where Ezra stood by the door with a laptop and a small projector he'd set up an hour earlier while Marcus was busy greeting people at the entrance, oblivious. The first slide went up on the wall behind the podium. Green Ridge Grounds, monthly invoice history. "This is the company that's been billing our HOA an average of $11,000 a month for basic lawn maintenance," Ezra said, voice carrying clean across the suddenly silent room. "It's registered to a property owned by Sharon Whitcomb." He paused, letting the name land, several heads turning toward the front row. "Under a maiden name that traces back to a joint bank account she shares with your HOA president." The room didn't erupt. It went dead quiet, the kind of quiet that's worse than shouting, 40 people doing math in their heads at the same time. "That's a lie," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its flatness. It cracked right down the middle. "It's a bank statement," Ezra said and clicked to the next slide. Renee watched Marcus's face while the numbers went up one by one. The pool resurfacing invoiced at nearly 4 times cost. The clubhouse repairs padded by $16,000. 3 years of capital improvements that traced, invoice by invoice, straight into an account with his name on it. She watched him look for an exit that didn't exist, watched Sharon slide her chair back an inch like she was already planning to leave before this finished. "Nearly $400,000. Renee said, when the last slide finally sat on the wall, plain and final. "Taken from this community over 3 years, while 5 of us in this room got fined and threatened with foreclosure for asking questions about exactly this. My lien is $8,000 for a paint color he says has been wrong for 2 years, and somehow never mentioned until I started asking about the budget. I'd like the board, and everyone in this room, to ask themselves which of those 2 numbers actually deserves a foreclosure notice." The room broke into noise then, all at once. People turning to each other, someone near the back saying, "Bought that new outdoor kitchen last spring, didn't he?" Another voice, louder, "My fence lien was for $4,000, is that in there too?" And Marcus stood at the podium with his windbreaker and his clipboard, and nothing left to say that anybody was going to believe. "This is a coordinated smear," he tried, weakly over the noise. "I built this community's reserve fund from nothing." "You built yourself a kitchen from nothing," Louis called out from his seat, and it wasn't even loud, but it landed harder than anything else said all night, because it was true and everyone in the room could picture the granite countertops he'd bragged about at the last block party. The board, 3 other members who'd apparently known nothing about any of it, judging by how pale they'd gone, called an emergency vote before the meeting even officially ended. Marcus was removed as president on the spot, 61 votes to 2, the 2 presumably his and Sharon's. Ezra's findings went, the following week, straight to the county's HOA Oversight Division and from there to the district attorney's office, since embezzlement of this size didn't stay a community matter for long. It took 4 months for the criminal case to move. An investigator confirming everything Ezra had already laid out, warrants pulling bank records that matched slide for slide, but when it landed hard. Marcus was charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and falsifying association records. Sharon took a plea deal in exchange for testifying against him, which told everyone in the neighborhood exactly how much loyalty $400,000 actually bought. Marcus pleaded down to avoid trial, but the judge wasn't interested in leniency once she saw exactly who he'd targeted while stealing. Homeowners, retirees, a widow on a fixed income he'd hit with a $4,000 lien for a fence he'd personally approved 9 years earlier. He was sentenced to 18 months, with a court-ordered restitution plan requiring him to repay the full $396,000 to the HOA over 10 years, on top of losing every cent Green Ridge Grounds had ever touched. Renee's lien was reversed within a month. Every fine from the past year wiped clean once the new board reviewed the pattern of violations and found what everyone already suspected. Half of them had never existed at all, just numbers Marcus typed up to punish anyone who looked too closely. Ginny got her $4,000 back with interest. Louis got an apology he probably didn't need, but appreciated anyway. The new HOA president was, unsurprisingly, Renee, nominated by Louis at the first meeting after Marcus's removal, seconded by Ginny before Renee had even finished saying she wasn't sure she wanted the job. "You're the only one who actually read the bylaws well enough to catch him," Louis said. "That's basically the whole job description at this point." She took it on one condition, written into the very first motion she made as president. Every financial statement, every invoice, every dollar spent by the association would be posted online, itemized, for any homeowner to see without asking permission from anybody. "Transparency isn't a threat," she said at that first meeting, looking out at a room that for once didn't feel like it was holding its breath. "It's just what should have been happening the whole time. If you had a Marcus in your neighborhood, someone hiding behind a clipboard while quietly robbing everyone around him, tell us about it in the comments. And if you liked watching this one get exactly what he deserved, hit subscribe, because there's always another story like this waiting to be told.